Hello, everybody, and welcome. Good morning, or good afternoon, or good middle of the night if you're joining from far away. Really excited to have you here to talk about our topic today, AI data centers, the cyber target of the century. Before we dive in, a little bit of quick housekeeping. This session is being recorded, and the recording and the slides will be made available to you after the fact. We'll send them in an email, as well as any articles or materials that we reference throughout the conversation. We also have a Q&A panel available, so if you have any questions, feel free to pop those into the Q&A chat. We'll either answer them during the flow if they fit in with the segment of the conversation that we're having, or we'll save some time at the end for that. And now I would like to quickly introduce our speakers, Raj Dodiawala, who's the Chief Product Officer here at Eclypsium, and John Lucades, our SVP of Strategy. If you guys could each just give a quick background of yourselves and your history in the cyberspace and why you are an awesome speaker for this exact topic, which I think you are, but I want to hear it from you. And then I'll go through the agenda of the topic, and we're going to keep it very conversational and would love to get some questions from the audience as well. So, yeah, Raj, why don't you take it away and give a
Sure.
quick intro?
Yeah. Hey, first of all, thanks to the audience, the participants that have joined this call. I'm Raj Dodiawala, Chief Product Officer at Eclypsium. I've got 25 plus years in cybersecurity, have worked on at a number of companies on a number of different types of cybersecurity initiatives, including, secure content management, including privilege access in EDR a lot, and also cloud security. So what is exciting about Eclypsium is, with all of the segments of cybersecurity I mentioned, this is one that remains a bit of a mystery to a lot of us, right? To a lot of the cybersecurity community. Like, how do you protect your firmware? Is there even a need to protect your firmware in your supply chain? And particularly now with AI data centers, the cyber target of the century, that's not just a hype. I think we believe that this is in fact, and we see evidence that this is in fact a critical area that needs attention.
Yeah, and I'm John Lucades. Thanks for joining, everybody. Some of you may have seen me before on similar Eclypsium things. I kind of go way back with this group, and my story is really that I got into this space largely addressing the same issue that Raj mentioned, right? You've got this obscure area of stuff that everybody builds on top of and becomes critical to everything that you're doing for security, but nobody can see it and nobody is really looking at it and understanding it. And when something goes wrong, it's kind of hard to deal with that. I wanted to fix that problem, so that's kind of why I'm here, and been doing things in that space with from a researcher perspective, from a response perspective, and now sort of handling a lot of our direct customers.
Right on. Yeah, we're going to get deep into some research that John did all the way back in 2019 about data center security. That spoiler alert, the vulnerabilities are still there, folks. But let's dive in. So I'm gonna walk through a quick agenda here. We're going to talk about AI data centers as critical infrastructure, this movement to treat AI companies as critical infrastructure, and also the way that AI is being incorporated into existing critical infrastructure segments like energy and manufacturing and defense, of course, and more, and why that makes AI data centers a target. This is the grand stage for geopolitical competition right now. Enormous investment in AI infrastructure, and that kind of puts a target on your back, especially in tense geopolitical times. We'll talk about specific attack surfaces within AI data centers, the hardware supply chain, the way that bare metal services are being offered up by AI data center companies, the hardware, the BMCs, the GPUs, the network infrastructure, all the gear that makes up an AI data center, and how it is vulnerable to attack, particularly by sophisticated nation state groups, but also just by more financially motivated, private ransomware gangs. We'll get into the discussion of trusted execution environments and confidential computing in AI hardware specifically, which is newer and different than trusted or confidential computing in the CPU realm. And we'll then, at the very end, talk about how Eclipsium fits into all of this and protecting the foundations of AI data centers right down to the hardware and the firmware. So the way the discussion is going to go is that I'm going to set a little context for each of these sections here, and then we're just going to let John and Raj go off on it. They're experts in the field. They've been doing this for decades, and they've been digging deep specifically on AI data center risk as of late. So we'll tee up some questions and then have a quick discussion. We invite questions from the audience, so please chime in if you have something. We'll read them aloud and answer them in flow if it makes sense. And then we'll do the next section, set the context, have the discussion all the way through. So yeah, I'm excited. Thanks for being here, you guys, and let's dive right in. So when we talk about AI as critical infrastructure, this is how all the big AI companies are positioning it right now. So NVIDIA, you might have heard of them. Jensen recently said in a Computex keynote, we are not a technology company only. We are now an AI infrastructure company. There was some congressional testimony recently that specifically advocated for AI companies to be treated as critical infrastructure in the CISA sense of the term. So there are 16, I think, critical infrastructure verticals, things like energy, chemicals manufacturing, defense, telecommunications is a big one in the cybersecurity news recently. And they get incentives, market incentives, tax incentives, et cetera, to invest in cybersecurity because critical infrastructure is a target for cyber attackers. So lots of major AI companies positioning as, transforming industries, the backbone of tomorrow's global economy, and safeguarding national security. This is the grand narrative about AI data centers. And when that's the position, cyber attacks are going to happen. That increases the interest in attacking these kinds of targets. Critical infrastructure is a target for cyber attackers. We have a chart here showing cyber attacks on critical infrastructure targets in the US from November 2023 through April 2024. It's a lot. Some of these are IT companies. There's a lot of like water systems and municipalities and stuff. And just yesterday, the Department of Homeland Security issued this warning that attacks on US critical infrastructure might increase following the Iran strikes. So when there are these global events occurring, the possibility and the fear of cyber attacks on critical infrastructure goes up. So with that, we're going to dive into our first discussion area, which is how do these international AI infrastructure deals and overall current events and just the rapidity of the build outs of AI data centers create new attack vectors that nation state actors are specifically targeting. So that's the question that's up for discussion right now, you guys. And yeah, let's hear from our expert panel here about this question.
One thing that immediately strikes me, and I don't know if Raj, this sort of comes to your attention immediately too, but you have a new area, and every time, and that happens, right? That happens a lot. We've seen it a number of times, and every time we sort of have a race to get into that new area and to start exploiting it as much as possible to look at all the benefits of AI. Everybody is talking about how we can increase productivity so much, and we really can. But the race to jump into something often skips a lot of the steps that you would like to have been performing to create more safety and reliability. In this case, we're jumping straight into what effectively is kind of a data center. It's the sort of the same kind of data center that we've been dealing with, but we're going to now apply that technology in a new way, which is going to create some new risks, which we probably haven't thought about as much, especially while you're racing to go and exploit it.
I agree. I think, and that there's two sort of additional perspectives I'd like to offer, right? So what's special about the AI infrastructure, right? So this is a new this is transformative sort of infrastructure, right? We're not using the same old servers. It's not leveraging, cloud resources like AWS, Azure, Google Cloud, etc. Right? This is something new, and whenever there is new, which of course is needed for the transformative nature of this application, it is going to raise the interest of cyber attackers. And the second part here is it's running some very critical, what let's call it application for now, right? Model building, training, inferencing, etc. And that is again to the attackers and to other nation states that see other nation states investing in this technology, that look, I got to do something about this. I need to figure this out from a cyber perspective. So I think that's really what is sort of compelling here in terms of we need to look at this a little bit differently from a security perspective than what we have traditionally other infrastructure that we have lots and lots of solutions for and understand well.
We've got a question in the chat that I think you pretty well answered, Raj, but maybe you want to double click, and I don't know if John, you want to chime in on it, but how is an AI data center different from a standard data center? It's a topic worthy of deep discussion, I think, because data centers have been around for a long time. High performance computing was kind of the term for a while. What's different about AI? What makes this a novel scenario on the world stage?
Sure. So I think I've kind of touched on this, but I think I can clarify maybe a couple of more points. And we actually have some material coming later that further amplifies this. So one, they're different because the type of equipment that you are deploying is different than what you have traditionally deployed. Number two, oftentimes in AI data centers is bare metal, right? You're not running VMs or something which provides a lot of isolation from the underlying infrastructure and isolation between VMs, etc. This is the heavy load that has been executed on this, meaning you're running on bare metal, right? So how do you protect all of that? And again, oftentimes this AI data centers or the AI infrastructure is leased to different groups or different customers, right? And when it's leased, you don't know how well the customer has protected that infrastructure. You get it back and you want to deploy it again. So the use case is a bit different too, let alone the nature of the infrastructure is different with GPUs and other types of new sort of hardware that's running sort of the next generation high performance computing requirements or trying to meet the computing requirements of AI applications.
And all of that creates complexity. And I think the complexity of an AI data center is what causes a little bit of a difference from what people are normally doing. If you're using the cloud normally, you kind of run in a VM, kind of like you mentioned. You are getting ingress and egress traffic like normally. But one thing that's a little different is when you're running an AI model inside one of these AI data centers, you have a massive amount of data synchronization across a lot of different individual computing nodes, in this case, probably GPUs. But this is where it sort of looks like high performance computing. A lot of references will come from that. But it also looks a lot like a very complicated network with really high bandwidth, low latency connections. Okay, so if you just think about it as a distributed computing problem, that's already pretty complicated. Now the actual hardware that you're connecting is not just your regular CPUs. You're actually starting to use a lot more of these ARM-based many core systems alongside GPUs that are designed for a different kind of computation being optimized. So you've got multiple layers in the stack here that are actually optimized differently. And it's not something that most people have handled before. Now, does that mean it's going to be a problem? No, it doesn't. And you do have these experts who are running those data centers, sort of building that and maintaining that. But one thing that I think is going to be new for everybody is the security implications. And in many ways, while these are very different, there's a similarity across this infrastructure to what we see in all the other infrastructures we've built since the beginning of time, which is that we're abstracting a bunch of stuff that is truly complicated. And it's going to have security problems. It's going to have issues that you're going to have to handle, but you're probably conditioned not to think about it. And that problem is sort of persistent among so many different things. In this area, we're gonna dive into some of the specifics around the AI data center.
Yeah. All right. Those are some good sneak previews for upcoming topics. We got the bare metal, we got the complexity, both of the data centers themselves and the supply chain that builds them. So let's dive right into our subsequent section here, which is the specific cyber risks to AI data centers and infrastructure. So Raj teased the bare metal risks and vulnerabilities, the notion that the more direct access that you have, which is demanded by the performance requirements of AI data centers, bare metal gives you more customization, more uh, options, but it also introduces the possibility that a user can introduce misconfigurations or risks that might affect subsequent users. We didn't talk as much, but network exploitation, I think, is another area we're going to dive into momentarily. The fact that, yeah, all the network interconnectivity both within the data center and connecting the data center to the broader enterprise that's operating the data center. We've seen a big increase in the targeting of things like routers and switches and firewalls and load balancers, the sort of network infrastructure that undergirds a lot of modern enterprise that has the potential to be the initial access vector for an attacker, and that can just as easily affect AI data centers and the businesses that operate them. And then the supply chain, yeah, John, you talked about just the sheer complexity, the the number, the amount of different components that go into this. They come from different places, hundreds of factories, lots of different sources. The geopolitical implications of the supply chain are also worth the discussion and tie into the notion of nation-state threats targeting critical infrastructure as AI data centers become critical infrastructure. The likelihood of APTs targeting them not only at the data center, but in the hardware supply chain of these, GPUs and these assets that are flowing internationally at a rapid clip for these quick build outs. It's going to be, it's going to be a target, and every attack vector will be used. We've got a question here, and I'm going to go ahead and just read it out loud and see which one of you guys wants to take it. But why does it seem you are implying that cloud does not offer dedicated servers versus only virtual? I would assume most organizations will be forced to use a cloud provider to gain AI and model options. I would further assume AI/AAS will be forthcoming. My initial answer to that is essentially that that's absolutely true. There will be both of the options, but as we said, the performance gains you can get and the customization you can get with a bare metal usage is going to be worth it for a lot of organizations. And the neo cloud providers, the data center cloud providers themselves, are going to have to mitigate against the risk of leasing out this bare metal infrastructure. But yeah, John or Raj, you want to take a swat at that one?
I might suggest sort of a context around that, right? In the beginning, you're going to have a lot of new models getting trained and a lot of new models getting used, right? In that sort of sense, you're going to want direct hardware access to sort of create something. Once it's been tuned and optimized, more of an as a service model to the AI itself, more of an inferencing, is going to be more useful. So I definitely see the case in the future where an as a service model is going to probably overtake a lot of this. But in the beginning, in particular, we're going to actually have a lot of very sensitive applications, a lot of very sensitive computations taking place on bare metal. And you can see that right now, where you do have a lot of bare metal offerings. And that is not to say that that hasn't been available with regular cloud computing. It certainly has. We're actually going to talk about that in a couple of minutes when we get into what the vulnerabilities of bare metal really are. But just to glimpse ahead, a lot of that really is back to what I was saying in the beginning. There are these layers that we're conditioned not to think about, but they're just more computers inside your computer. And if you were going to do all these security things to your regular computer, why is it somehow special that that other computer doesn't need it? And it turns out it does. And it turns out that a lot of those same problems exist at multiple layers. And that is, the usual problem here rearing its head again in the AI space.
I think perhaps there was another tenet in the question that I can see if I can answer. I think perhaps it was precision, but let me just address this, right? That why wouldn't the existing cloud providers also provide bare metal? And yes, they can and they will, right? But right now there are specialists like the neo clouds that are providing this and are in fact offering that to these cloud providers to build their own models and all of that good stuff, right? So there is some symbiotic relationship there, but in the end, we expect cloud providers to also offer some bare metal services. And as John mentioned, yeah, there are some services like agentic AI and others potentially would run in VMs in the cloud or on the edge, et cetera. So those are all okay and should and probably will happen, right? But to train and to build the underlying models, this is kind of what's driving the bare metal consumption.
And to be
Yeah.
fair, we are focusing a lot on the differences, not the similarities. Yes, there are a lot of similarities. You totally can run a lot of stuff in regular, cloud infrastructure. It's not super interesting to talk about that relative to AI unless you're sort of really poking at, what is it special about AI use cases that causes you to do things differently in your data center? Like these high bandwidth, low latency connections to GPUs that are all operating in parallel and doing these massive calculations on a big data set. I think in those areas, we're going to kind of look down at specific components of the hardware and the firmware that's related to those components and sort of focus in on those. But yeah, there's certainly a lot of other stuff that's the same.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you. And please keep them coming, folks. So yeah, pretty good segue into talking about the AI hardware attack surface. The fact is that inside of these AI data centers, you have a lot, you have compute, you have AI compute, you have baseboard management controllers, which we'll get a little bit deeper into. Those are the subject of some recent NVIDIA publications about their security flaws, as well as recent Eclipsium publications about their security flaws, SSDs, hardware accelerators. There's a lot of stuff, as John put it eloquently, and I quote him often, there's a lot of computer inside your computer. Uh, there's another computer inside your computer that may or may not have the security applied against it that you might expect. So baseboard management controllers specifically are a topic that we focus on a lot. We recently published this research in cooperation with AMI about open BMC security in practice. And we noticed that NVIDIA also had recently published this awesome research. We'll send out the link. You should definitely check it out on Breaking BMC, the Forgotten Key to the Kingdom. They investigated 18 vulnerabilities in baseboard management controllers, and I think they came up with 9 proof of concept exploits against them that could potentially be utilized against modern day AI data centers. And it's great to see them doing this research because it shows that they are thinking about this deep sort of hardware foundation level risk. And some of the vulnerabilities they discuss are really old, some are more recent. Eclipsium has also disclosed just a couple months ago BMC vulnerabilities, specifically in AMI and in the MegaRack interface. So this is an ongoing risk area where not only are there existing vulnerabilities that are still out there, but there are new vulnerabilities being discovered. And because of the deep level and the broad access that BMCs have, they're a unique attack surface that I think attackers will increasingly be targeting, particularly in the context of AI data centers. And that wouldn't be a totally novel thing to happen. Eclipsium did some research. John himself was involved in this research back in 2019. The vulnerability was nicknamed Cloudborne, and essentially it was a situation where the BMCs, I think in IBM cloud infrastructure, were not being sanitized at the firmware level between customers. And so it introduced the possibility that a user, a customer, could insert a backdoor or misconfigurations that would not be sanitized out before the next customer got access to that bare metal infrastructure. So you guys already got into the discussion about BMCs a little bit, but let's go a click deeper, I guess, on the unique risks of bare metal shared infrastructure. We had the question of, why are we talking so much about bare metal versus AI as a service or virtualization? I think we answered that pretty well. But what are the unique risks of bare metal shared infrastructure? Why is it such a thing in AI data centers compared to, more traditional APC? And how does it amplify the risks in this current environment of rapid AI data center build out?
Yeah, so let me start with this one, right? So really, we touched on some of these things, right? So again, let's look at like supply chain challenges that we are well aware of in sort of traditional end user computing or traditional data center, backend servers that deliver business applications, right? This one is now greatly multiplied from a supply chain perspective because the number of components in a AI server is many more than what you would expect in a traditional server. We already talked about GPUs, but there's also network interconnects, et cetera, for fast networking as well as low latency networking as well as traditional networking. So there are some supply, depending on the given the large number of components, there is risks from a supply chain perspective that need to be examined. The core bare metal risk is really, again, AI data centers are typically in the business, or majority of them, particularly the neoclouds, are in the business of leasing this equipment, getting it back after the use is complete, and then deploying it as quickly as possible. So the utilization needs to be high for them to make their profits, right? And the idea here is that between deployments, how do you know that what you're providing to the customer is secure? How do you actually certify or even attest like this is actually good to go for the next iteration? It's easy in a VM environment. You kill the VM, spin up a new one, and you got a kind of a fresh environment, right? This is not quite the same. So you have to think about how do you establish a baseline or a gold image, understand what the drift from the gold image is, and then go ahead and provision this to your next customer, et cetera. So again, the element, the business model, the fact that this runs strictly on bare metal, the fact that the number of components and the supply chain risk of those components is high, all of that comes into play here with respect to the risks that need to be examined.
Yeah, shared infrastructure is difficult, right? And you've seen a number of instances where something gets forgotten about the shared infrastructure and something within it that has an impact to the security of different tenants of that infrastructure. In Cloudborn, that was a BMC vulnerability. So we're still in this mode where we're finding all sorts of BMC vulnerabilities in all sorts of equipment. One of the major points of the paper that we just released is really about the maintenance of these critical components and how often are they getting updates? How often are they handling the vulnerabilities of the internal software that is just like every Linux system, or even Windows as a similar sort of model, where you just have to have more updates because you base all of your code on all of this other code, usually often open source. So we were looking at OpenBMC, and you start to see that you sort of inherit a lot of problems. Who's managing that? How are they managing that? How frequently are they handling what's contained within it? When you look at something like Cloudborn, you take any one of these vulnerabilities. Now, at the time, we had some vulnerabilities that allowed us to rewrite the firmware within the card, or within the BMC. So if you're able to make such a change, and then you go in as another tenant and you get the same hardware and you see that change persisted, you've kind of proven that you can do a whole lot of things, because the BMCs are literally for changing the configuration and managing the device, even if you break the operating system on the device. So it should be able to recover that whole thing. That means it has a lot of power. Interestingly, in an AI data center, we not only have those BMCs, but we also have these smart network cards that are going to connect and manage what is visible to the host. And now you, as a tenant, are getting access to the host with direct access to this hardware. If something goes wrong there, you have lots of ways that you can start talking to different infrastructure that you weren't supposed to see, that you can start making modifications that persist even when you're on the next tenant. And that's the point of doing research like Cloudborne. That's the point of looking at these underlying layers. In many ways, I want to sort of take the mystery away from these layers and just sort of say, look, guys, this is a computer. It works like all the other computers you've seen. Yeah, it's got certain things that are optimized, certain special things. How are you handling updates? How are you handling management of that computer? It's like yet another computer for you to handle.
Yeah, layers of challenges. It's Linux all the way down, as they say. Um, I've got a question in the chat that I'm not 100% sure exactly where it would fit in, so I'm just going to lob it out there because it seems interesting to me. Um, are you guys seeing any traction for DPIN? And I think that means distributed or decentralized physical infrastructure in AI. And what are the special security concerns with using a DPIN providers? This is not an area that I've personally dug into much, and I'm curious. This is not a central focus of our talk right now, but I'm curious whether that's something that you guys, John or Raj, have come across and what you think about it.
So from what I can tell, there's and again, I'm not too deep into it either, but from what I can tell, there's sort of two problems embedded into that area. One is this decentralized function. Think of like a distributed ledger or cryptocurrency, and you have a lot of operations that you need to verify because you sort of are distributing the trust around the different nodes. That's one place where just that alone has a set of properties that depend on what I would call the infrastructure of the system, and not just one system, all of the nodes, right? If you have the ability to make changes on a node, well, you're supposed to verify it from other nodes, and that's part of the defense. But if you have a widely applicable vulnerability at this underlying layer, you might be able to do a lot more. And that may be a significant issue in those distributed applications. But now what you're doing is you're coupling all of that with an AI infrastructure. So you have these two infrastructures, both of which have their own unique concerns, and you're going to stick them together. And the AI is going to manage, who's doing what or similar optimizations. And that's great. But what you're seeing now is actually an example of the thing that we're saying all over the place here. Yeah, you could have taken cloud infrastructure and added AI infrastructure. You could have taken, given application as a service, added AI on top of it. In all of those cases, what you're doing is taking the attack surface of the one thing and adding the other thing on top of it. So now you've got all of those AI pieces, AI related hardware, and the AI related software that's talking to it, that if I have a problem with that, is potentially just as powerful as if I had a problem with which was pervasive across all of the nodes in my distributed architecture. So I see this as a largely an attack surface management problem, where things like isolation can help. Things like how you are handling configuration management on all of these things can help. But one of the approaches that I have found over the years to be most impactful is the idea that says, which we now call zero trust, right? You could call it a lot of things, but it's the idea that says something's going to go wrong, and what are you going to do about it when that happens? And having an architecture that already comprehends that expectation. And so usually what I end up with is a monitoring solution, and sort of add something that's going to detect and respond when you have stuff operating outside of its parameters.
So you're saying that to combine AI and blockchain is sort of like saying, I heard you like attack surfaces, so I'm going to help you put an attack surface on your attack surface so that you can, uh,
Yeah,
yeah,
I pretty much say that about everything, don't I?
yeah, the idea we talk sometimes about like mergers and acquisitions where there's like this unknown attack surface. You want to make sure that anything you're plugging in from the acquired company is clean because there's no chance you have 100%
Heard you like
visibility.
attack surface.
Yeah, I heard you like attack surfaces. All right. Uh, so I think now's a good time to flip into our third sort of area of discussion, which is trusted execution and confidential computing in AI. OpenAI had this great post that they published over a year ago now, May 2024, that was called Reimagining Secure Infrastructure for AI. And at the time, I feel like not a lot of organizations were using the term infrastructure and talking about infrastructure in the sense of this sort of foundational hardware. And we'll get into sort of the different layers from the applications to the models down to the hardware of AI and attack surfaces. But they had this tidbit in this post that said, as promising as confidential computing for GPUs is, the technology is still nascent. Additionally, confidential computing technologies on CPUs have had their share of vulnerabilities, and we cannot expect GPU equivalents to be flawless. Now, that was about a year ago. I think that we've come pretty far. Any of the major AI providers will talk about the confidential computing options that they have, but the fact is that it's still new, and as we've seen, with as in with the BMC thing, there's been vulnerabilities for ages. There's still new ones being discovered. Anytime you have a new technology paradigm, it's a long process of really an endless process of discovering and mitigating vulnerabilities and risks. And here we talk a lot about in the broader industry, we see a lot of discussion about the security of AI models. You talk about jailbreaking and prompt injection and people trying to get the models to do stuff that the companies don't want them to do. We talk a lot about the AI app security, especially in the age of agentic AI, not letting runaway agents do stuff that you don't want them to do. We don't see as much discussion, and that's why we are having this discussion of the AI infrastructure. So that's the compute hardware exposed in a cloud deployment, as we've been discussing, and just the hardware itself, the GPUs, the GPU servers, the firmware, the computers inside your computers that make AI happen are under-secured and even under-discussed overall. And this is kind of the area where Eclypsium focuses. But before we go into our sort of how Eclypsium attaches to all of this stuff, I want to just have this discussion of trusted execution, roots of trust, and confidential computing in AI data centers. And I guess this is going to be the area of discussion. We just had a good question come in that I think is another solid tee up for the topic. So doesn't TEE, that's trusted execution environments, TXT, SGX, and similar technologies cover these things for data centers? Why is confidential computing not good enough? Couldn't have asked it better myself. All right, guys, let's discuss. If you want to start with answering that question or just sort of give a broader dive into the topic, let's go for it.
Yeah, can do a little bit of both, and John can chime in here as well. But I think so. There exists these environments, trusted execution, confidential computing, but they are in their infancy. Recognize that even in the CPU world, we have seen these to have vulnerabilities, right? That they're not flawless, and I think the OpenAI quote kind of referred to that as well. So we're seeing that in our own tests, in our own experience with these data center servers. So again, this technology is not quite there yet. It will be, but it's not quite there yet. And recognize that, we're talking about CPU having its own, then you have GPUs that need to have a similar capability, and then the two of them working in tandem to make sure that you're protecting the data as it goes from, CPU instructions to the GPU to the shared memory, all of that. So there's a number of moving parts here. So individually, you may be able to protect perhaps these components, but the way that they work together, we need to examine that further and see if there are any what are the open items or challenges in that regard.
So kind of, I totally agree with that. And I think it's interesting if you dive into each one of these confidential computing technologies, right? And like Raj mentioned, like that OpenAI quote mentioned, people have found issues with these, and you should expect that there will be more issues, no matter who made the next version of that, technology. One interesting observation that I have, and of course, I have a little bit of a bias here, and I know that Intel is going through a rough patch right now. But when they made SGX, they did something really wild, really interesting. I found this particularly cool. They understood that there would be a TCB of trusted computing base, that when there is a problem with this area of the system, they're going to have to do something about the fact that all trust is based on that thing, and then you may have just lost it, right? So you might have to go and regain trust. And that was a very cool idea. It's really hard to deal with. And I have, a lot of empathy for what they're trying to deal with on that. But they're trying to deal with it. And the concept is exposing something that we have all the time, whether somebody designed it in or not, right? And so this is a good example when you talk about something like, going back to the question that we got here, TXT. TXT is a technology that's basically allowing you to measure the environment, technically at any given time, but particularly often it's used at boot. But you're using hardware to connect the actual code being executed to the measurement, right? And that's pretty cool. It relies on a TPM, but it kind of goes beyond a TPM. The problems that often come up with TXT are the things that aren't included in those measurements, right? So the traditional one was system management mode was not included. You need to have an STM or another component in there that basically nobody has. And there's all of these little gotchas. Over time, they've started closing those gaps, but you get this really interesting property where there are gaps. And based on those gaps, you can start to build more and more of an attacker infrastructure, an attack surface that you can leverage. This is kind of the same thing, whether you're talking about TXT or the ARM trust zone stuff, or you're talking about some other trusted execution environment in confidential computing. And what's lacking is that infrastructure that lets you see, number one, I am on this version of the trusted computing base. It may have certain properties. Here's what the pros and cons are of that particular version. And what am I going to do about it when I don't like it? Am I going to somehow reestablish trust? And how do I do that? That concept, especially when it's going through a cloud provider or some as a service offering that you don't get to control that level, knowing at least some visibility into that level allows you to make risk decisions and introduce mitigations. That's the key. It's this lack of visibility and the ability to actually track with whatever the gaps are.
Killer answer. Love it. I hope if the person who asked that question was asked any follow-ups, I feel like John could go deep on this thing. We've got another question in the chat that it's a little outside of what we're talking about here, but I think it's worth addressing, which is what about on-premise AI using AI workstations? And just out the gate, I would say, yeah, some organizations are going to try that. There's definitely use cases for that, but the reason that there's, mega zillion dollar neoclouds getting built up is because there's perceived demand for AI data centers and for, hyperscale AI cloud services. And so there's use cases for that. But John or Raj, if you've got something to note about security concerns or use cases in general for on-premises AI and AI workstations, fire away.
I'd point at the attacks, right? That's usually what I do, right? I'm really the sort of person who looks really hard at the attacks and tries to build around that. The attacks for a shared infrastructure, you have certain particular things that are really interesting. You might say that on-prem you might have some sharing, but it's entirely possible that the whole reason you brought it on-prem is so that you don't have sharing. Okay, cool. But you still have a supply chain, right? And in particular with on-prem infrastructure, one of your biggest problems tends to be the management of that supply chain, both at a software, firmware, and hardware levels, right? So you've got all of these moving parts that, unless you're really a specialist in a lot of these components, you're probably not tracking. And so in my opinion, one of the bigger attack vectors to on-premise, whether it's AI or anything else, is going to be that very complex supply chain of what's going into that on-premise equipment.
Yeah. And I'll add one more thing. Again, it is like any other equipment on-prem, but for AI, it's, what are the vulnerabilities? You can acquire some equipment, looks clean, is great, but software, firmware, all of those always, 6 months later you discover a vulnerability, and a little bit later you discover there is a known exploit, right? So those are all of the things that you would precautions or things that you would inspect every time you're using any device on your system, whether it's an AI server or it's your laptop or it's a networking switch.
Yeah. And another interesting thing about that, when you just make and this is a decision that every organization has to deal with, right? You can decide to go and bring your stuff on-prem, and then you have to spend time managing it. If you put it outside of your organization, whether that's a particular data center or it's the public cloud or whatever, you're externalizing that responsibility. There are things that you don't have to do anymore. But when you decide to do something, really having the resources to manage it is usually a harder problem than people give it credit for. And so then you find out that you've under-resourced these things the hard way. And that's the kind of problem that I guess I think we're really getting at, where, yeah, you can do that, but you have to then have all of these resources that are looking deeper into the supply chain of all those components.
Yeah, absolutely. There's just a whole equation that goes into deciding. And we have customers, candidly, we have huge, financial services customers, we have NeoCloud customers, and there's companies that are doing it all. They're using the AI cloud services. They're also building an internal AI data center. So not quite workstations, but they have their own clusters internally, and they're probably are having AI workstations. It's different use cases, different risks, and you always are deciding whether to accept or mitigate or transfer risk, and accept or outsource, costs and management capabilities. We have another good question in the chat, but I want to save it to the end because I want to make sure that we actually get through our material. This has been such a juicy discussion, but I want to make sure we get the Eclypsium content in here. So we've talked a lot about this Eclypsium, or about the risks of multi-tenant GPU infrastructure and of transferring or of clearing out down to the very firmware level the infrastructure, the bare metal, before letting it be leased out to a new customer. And this is something that Eclypsium is helping customers with today. So their NeoCloud customer will lease out this bare metal infrastructure. They'll use it for a big training run, and then they relinquish it. The NeoCloud has to reclaim it, and they want a certain level of security or assurance, confidence that gear has been wiped and reset to a gold image. All the NeoClouds, much like the non-NeoClouds before them, use a shared responsibility model. They talk about the parts that they are responsible for versus the parts that the customer is responsible for when it comes to security. And the infrastructure, the firmware on the bare metal, falls pretty squarely into the responsibility of the NeoCloud. And it would just be a bad look to have, a cloud-borne type situation pollute the models or leak the extremely sensitive data of a major financial customer or defense contractor from one user to the next. And this is something that Eclypsium is able to very effectively support in the context of an AI data center. I'd say there's sort of two directions that it can go. One is obviously the NeoClouds want to provide this security and be confident that they're secure. But also big enterprises are demanding this from the neoclouds, and they're saying you gotta be protecting this gear and resetting this gear to this level of granularity before we're going to be comfortable using it for our critical use cases. So we've got a big neocloud customer that's using us for this exactly. The implications not only on security, but just on, as we touched on before, on utilization. Like if it takes you a long time to turn over that gear, or if some sort of thing gets introduced into the gear that makes it operate a little more slowly, you are not getting back your money. You know, they're leasing out these GPU hours. There's a Bloomberg ticker for the price of a GPU hour now. Like this is a commoditized unit. Uh, and so they need to maintain performance, maintain utilization, and maintain security all while flipping this infrastructure fast. And that's something that we're helping both enterprises and neoclouds with at this time. So providing, full continuous chain of trust for enterprise hardware. We can scan the GPUs and the devices before you connect them as you're doing this build out of the AI data center, whether you're a neocloud or an enterprise building your own out. We can monitor during operations to make sure that there's no misconfigurations or backdoors introduced in between those customers. And device decommissioning is another big one that we haven't talked about much yet, but there's a really fast refresh cycle happening on this AI gear. Likely all the big neoclouds are going to want to get the newest, hottest thing from NVIDIA as soon as it comes out, and they're probably going to decommission some other stuff that might still have good life in it, but not for this like tip top of the performance use case, neocloud use cases. They want to be able to clear that stuff out and restore it to a gold state where they're comfortable selling it potentially rather than just shredding it and destroying it. They want to be able to recoup some of those costs. So we think that for neoclouds and for enterprises using neoclouds, there's some questions you should be asking yourself or your provider to make sure that the security controls are in place at this level of depth. Things like, these are just a few samples, but can your GPUs prove their integrity? Is your network infrastructure monitored at the firmware level? Are you sure that recycled or reused or like reclaimed, between users hardware is free of prior compromise? And how do you assure that your GPUs are untampered with between bare metal customers? So here's a plug. We have an ultimate guide to AI data center security that has a bunch of more assessment questions, both if you are building out your own data center as a neocloud or as an enterprise, or if you are about to contract with a provider and you want to make sure that their concept of shared responsibility has the level of granularity that you expect. We'll distribute this to everybody here. We've got some awesome questions popping in, so I'm kind of speed running through the Eclypsium pitch here so we can talk through these other questions that we have coming up. But
just a quick comment on
yeah.
that paper that you have up here on the AI data center and sort of a guide for you as a user of this stuff. I think that kind of gets at some of the questions that I'm seeing pop up, but it also is. I just wanted to let folks know that I think a lot of this, the most useful bits of maybe what you can do are in there as part of that self-assessment concept, right? And it's not necessarily something that you are going to do. It's something that you need to know the answer to, right? Whether it's your part of the shared responsibility model or it's the cloud provider's part, there are questions here that should really get answered, like, how do you know about the integrity of the system that I'm about to use for some really sensitive thing, right? Give me some evidence about that, right? And usually those are the sort of questions that get overlooked because they're complicated and they require you to know stuff at a lower level of the stack, right? So as long as you are asking those questions of your provider, then somebody has to go figure it out. And that's the problem that usually drags the whole industry down, is that it gets forgotten and nobody asks the question.
I think I'd add one more thing here, right? This area is evolving fast. It's an emerging tech, we're all learning new experiences. And if you wish to provide us feedback on how aligned these are to what you're seeing in the questions you are asking, welcome to have a dialogue or provide your feedback to us. that would be great.
Yeah, that's a good
Take some
point,
time.
Raj.
Yeah.
Like we need a community that's kind of learning from each other on this. We're trying to be really strong in learning these components and trying to understand what all is wrong with them, what can go wrong, how do you know if it's applied to this particular case. But the problem isn't limited to any one part of the stack. Just as an example, when I was thinking about some of the other problems, Chase, that you were mentioning, if you're trying to do sort of ethical AI stuff, and you're going to try and put limits on what that AI agent or capability is doing, and there's a whole cat and mouse around how to bypass that or how to secure that. Um, the infrastructure upon which it's built is like a whole other problem that's outside of what you're usually thinking about. And this is where I think it's really important for us to work together. Because if you end up securing a thing that has no bearing on the particular security property you're after, then you wasted a bunch of time. But if you end up not securing a thing that undercuts everything else you're doing, then you have you also wasted a bunch of time because you're kind of open to bypass of everything. So kind of my thinking is to kind of go back to the, when I was sort of getting started in my career, I was learning from the safety community. And the idea of being able to do a more rigorous analysis of what it is that you actually care about, your security policy, so to speak, and then be able to know that when certain events occur, you're going to be okay. I think that kind of a thing is usually collaborative, and usually one person just doesn't have all of the visibility into all of the areas that are required.
Right on. We got some great questions in here. We only have a couple minutes left, folks. We're going to try and get through them. Let's see. Do you guys think that in the next 5 years, most major enterprises will have their own private AI data center cluster, or will they rely on the cloud model?
I'd say it'll be both. We know of enterprises today that are leveraging neoclouds because it's kind of the quick way to get to understanding what models they need to build or extend. But then, because of privacy and other considerations, they're also bringing that in-house, particularly to run inferencing and such. So I think we'll have both models for a period of time.
Yeah, another narrative I'm seeing is that sort of the overall the bulk of workloads may transition from training. Training will always happen, but we'll see more and more inference. And I wouldn't be at all surprised to see in-house sort of inference engines, but still big training outsourced to clouds or some mix. I think it'll always be there. It might follow a similar trajectory to sort of more legacy cloud stuff where it's like you are always doing that calculus of what management and risk to bring in-house and what management and risk to outsource. What would you say are the top 5 most common attacks for AI data centers?
So
Certainly BMC, but go ahead, John. You're
yeah.
than this.
You're going to say the same thing, I know. I actually, whenever you look at like a top 5 or a top whatever, I usually work with how do you break up these different parts? You can break it up a lot of different ways. So one of the things I usually do is look at the management infrastructure. That's where BMCs go, but there's like other stuff to that. There's a whole software stack. There's a process and procedure. I look at the management infrastructure as one of those top areas. And I sort of separate it from another top area, which is the network infrastructure. Right now, you're getting huge amounts of attention from adversaries on your network infrastructure. And they're exploiting these supply chain issues where you have old stuff, broken stuff, vulnerable stuff that you probably wouldn't have if you were directly managing that. But you don't. That's a black box that you put over here, and it's supposed to do a certain thing. When you look at those areas, you've got sort of this top 2, but then you're going to kind of move up the stack and look at, okay, what am I building and using that infrastructure for? and the application layer of issues as well. So there's more. I could kind of fill out more of a top 5, but I do think I want to draw a lot of attention to the management and the networking sides.
Good one.
All right, we're right at the top of the hour. Should we take one more question or wrap it up? Let's do one more. You guys got time for one more? All right. What are the greatest challenges for AI-driven data centers in the era of quantum computing? Are there AI and non-AI driven solutions to mitigate these risks?
So quantum computing is it's a game changer in a lot of ways, right? So you've got major impact to cryptography. And one of the things I would suggest people pay attention to at this point is really the post-quantum crypto algorithms. And at some point, when this starts to take off, I think this PQC angle is going to be one of the more impactful ones, where not only is it something you can see coming, but it's going to have at least some options available to you that you're going to want to have a few years to go implement and replace those algorithm modernization activities. There's certainly other AI related aspects to this. I'm not sure I'm on top of all of that, but I think if we start with the post-quantum crypto, we'll probably be in a place where we're working on it for a while anyway, and that would probably get us a lot of the more immediate problems as quantum computing starts to take hold.
Awesome. Thanks so much. To the folks who had questions in the chat that we didn't quite get to, thank you so much. A couple of people asked whether we have a case study or whether the slides and recordings will be available. Yes, we have a case study about a customer in this area. We will share it. We will share the slides, the recording, this ultimate guide to AI data center security, our OpenBMC security research that we published with AMI, as well as our other recent BMC research. And we'll send you a link to that NVIDIA report, which is really worth reading. And with that, I think we're going to wrap it up. Thank you so much to everybody who joined and participated. This was a really juicy conversation, and we have another webcast that's going to be a technical deep dive into sort of chip level security and architecture next month. So please make sure to join that. And thank you so much, John and Raj, for contributing your expertise on this matter. Really looking forward to continuing to dig into this interesting AI data center security topic. I think it's only going to grow more urgent and important as time goes on. So thank you everybody who attended. Thank you, John and Raj, and you'll get an email from us with tons of resources coming up really soon. Have a great one, everyone.
Thanks for having us.
Bye.